Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Wise Body Podcast, where we talk about eating disorder recovery and all things body. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Hughes. I bring 20 years of experience as an eating disorder therapist, and I've worked with hundreds of clients to feel more empowered and connected to their body by tapping into the wisdom it holds. I'm so excited to keep learning with you as we navigate the windy path that is recovery. So let's get started. Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Wise Body. I'm Dr. Sarah Hughes. I thought I would come on here today and talk a little bit about some things that I've learned in the last 20 years as an eating disorder therapist. There have been hundreds, countless things, and some of those things will come by way of my debunking myths episode. I feel like those will be a frequent thing on here. And I actually thought that I wrote a blog about the things that I've learned in the last 20 years as an eating disorder therapist, but I guess I didn't. As I usually do, I jotted down some notes on a piece of scrap paper, and I thought I would just talk about a few of those here. These are just the ones that came to my mind today. But I know there are so many things that I would want to share with you, and I likely will in future episodes. So these are just some that I'm highlighting for you today. And as you may remember, I call these my Wise Five. So think of them as 5 takeaways from this episode 4. So the first one is it takes a village to help with eating disorder recovery. And it's not just your care team, but it's family, friends, those who you keep in your close circle of trust, those that you keep in your close orbit, if you will. And I get this question a lot, like, how do you know if you should tell someone about your eating disorder? And my response to that first and foremost is that you get to choose who you tell and how you tell them and how much you tell them. And it's such a personal thing and maybe something to talk more with your therapist about, flesh some of this stuff out in a session. But really, if you're looking for more support and you really trust this person, that might be an indication that they're a good person to disclose your eating disorder to. And it may just be helpful to let them in just a little bit. But really, I highlight if this is a person that is close to you, this is like a best friend, this is someone that you can confide in. And also, hopefully this person has a healthy relationship with food and their bodies and exercise, so that they can maybe help model some of those good behaviors, healthier behaviors. And that might be hard to tell too, right? Especially if you have an eating disorder. And I think there is such a fine line between what's considered healthy and what's considered, an eating disorder, disordered eating. So again, why it might be a good idea to talk to your therapist about this too, so that you can get a better sense of what this person is like and if they have a good relationship with food and their bodies and exercise, because that can be hard to tell sometimes when you have an eating disorder of your own. But sometimes telling people helps you stay accountable. So it could even just be with meals or limiting exercise, getting into a regular pattern of eating or exercise. This person could also help you maybe find a therapist or seek care. Of course, we don't necessarily want to put all of the responsibility on this person, but if they are someone that you trust, you feel like they're modeling good, healthy behaviors, then they could help. The other thing I think about is when you tell someone, it exposes the eating disorder. And so a lot of times eating disorders, they stay silent and quiet, and it's your own sort of special thing that no one maybe knows about or needs to know about, or it may be something that people are encouraging, and so you don't necessarily think it's a problem. So as I'm talking about this, I'm realizing how layered this could be for you, maybe how complex this is of an issue. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that it really takes a lot of support to get better from an eating disorder. And if there are a few people in your circle that you trust, it might be helpful to tell them. It might be something that they can help you with. But again, it can get maybe a little tricky if that person doesn't have a healthy relationship with food or exercise or their bodies. It could help sustain your own eating disorder. So those are just some things to think about. The second thing that I learned in my last 20 years as an eating disorder therapist is that it takes time to recover. And so I think clients, along with family and friends, might think one time in treatment or a few weeks with an eating disorder therapist is really going to solve the problem. And I hope it does, right? I hope it does. And actually, the earlier that someone gets help, the better the prognosis. So if you are thinking that you have a problem with exercise or food or body image, seek help out early. And sometimes it might take months or years to recover from an eating disorder. And sometimes it takes several times in treatment at various or all levels of care. Sometimes clients might think that it might not be helpful or they can do it on their own or things of that nature. And I think that also keeps the eating disorder alive. If it's not addressed or challenged, thinking that you have to kind of go it alone and that treatment isn't like reality. I know I've talked about this in a previous episode, that treatment isn't like a safe bubble as it should be to help practice eating regularly and enough without maybe overdoing exercise. That's just an example. But treatment can really, really help. It's okay if you need to go back to treatment. It's okay if you need a higher level of care. That just means you need more support. It does not mean that you're a failure or that you're not doing a good job in your recovery. Research indicates that relapse rate is as high as 50%. That's mostly with anorexia and bulimia, maybe a little bit lower with binge eating, but still pretty high. It could be like in the 20 or 30% range for relapse rate. And it really just depends on the chronicity and severity of the eating disorder, how long you've had the eating disorder and how frequent the behaviors are, and maybe even the eating disorder type. That all sort of plays a role into relapse rates. But again, sometimes it can require 2, 3, 5 or more times in treatment. It might take 5, 6, 7, 10 years cycling in and out of treatment. But my message here is to keep trying and to not give up. And also that each time you go into treatment, you are different and changed and you know more and you keep learning. With relapse, I think the greatest gift, if you want to call it that, is learning from the relapse. So like what was going on that led to the relapse in behaviors? Maybe it was a new trigger that you were unaware of and you fell back into the pattern of the eating disorder. It really just can take time and it's really hard to be patient. And I think especially too with family and friends that have this misconception that, oh, you go to treatment and then when you're finished or discharged that like you're all better. And that's not necessarily true. Even like after treatment, that's where sometimes the really hard work begins. I think the maintenance stage, really hard to maintain. It's hard to get there and then it's hard to push through and sort of sustain recovery. That's really what I mean about the maintenance stage, where you are not engaging in eating disorder behaviors. You're within a sort of healthy weight range or set weight range. I don't like that term. And you're sustaining that. You're eating enough regularly. If you're engaging in exercise, it's joyful. There isn't, guilt associated with it, and you're sort of going along. There may be slips here and there, but for the most part, you're maintaining in your recovery. Also, this is another point I wanted to make, which is some people say that like, I hear this from my clients that they're always going to have their eating disorder. It's always going to be part of who they are. They're always going to have an eating disorder and voice. And when clients tell me that's a belief that maybe they have, and at the time, and maybe they believe that forever, and I'm not here to change your mind. And for sure, in times of stress or transition, right, the eating disorder can rear its ugly head, as they say, and come back with a vengeance. I also believe in transcendence. I believe that people can reach a place in their recovery where their eating disorder is not on their mind and they're not having eating disorder thoughts or negative body image thoughts. I know it sounds like really lofty, but it can happen. So there is a theory, concept, if you will, called stages of change. And it was developed by two psychologists. And you can look this up, but it was really about smoking cessation. And they believe that you need to go through these stages of change to sustain change. So the first one is pre-contemplation, right? And it's like not even thinking it's a problem. It's not even on your radar. Then the next is contemplation. So like thinking about it, right? It's exactly how it sounds. Contemplation. Maybe I have a problem. I don't really like how I've been feeling, or I've been dizzy, or I've gone a long time without eating and I don't know if that's normal, or I sat down and had a whole bag of whatever and I don't know if that's right. So having some of these questions that are coming up, that's a contemplation stage. Then there's preparation, that's preparing to make change. So in smoking cessation, it might be looking into smoking cessation programs, Googling like a hotline, talking to your therapist about steps to stop smoking, things like that. Then there's action, right? So it's like taking action. That's when like you pick up the phone, you call the eating disorder treatment facility, you do an intake, you go there, right? You're in treatment. That is action. I mean, there's not a better example of that, right? Like really taking action, steps to change. And then there's maintenance, which I've referenced. So that's like when you're really in the groove of recovery, you might have a slip here or there. But then there's this last sort of stage of transcendence. And that's point where it's like, what eating disorder? Or like, I didn't even grab my pack of cigarettes when I got into the car. It doesn't come into your mind at all. Or if it does, it's like a very infrequent thought and it feels weird or wrong. And I really do believe that people can get to that place. And I'm not trying to sound like all Pollyanna, but I believe that you can achieve this place of total freedom from your eating disorder or exercise compulsion or obsession. I really, really do. I've seen it happen and it's a really lovely place to be. But then there's another camp of people that believe I'm going to have this forever and it's just something that I'm going to have to deal with. And if I have to go to treatment, I will. If I have to go back to my therapist, I have to add a nutrition therapist again, I will, right? And that's okay too, right? Each to his own. So just wanted to add in there that level of transcendence. I believe it exists. I believe people can get there. And it helps if you believe you can get there too, right? If you don't believe you can get there, it's not going to be on your radar and then you won't. So just something to think about. Then my third thing that I've learned, among the many, is that it's not about food, right? So I think often I hear family members or friends really frustrated with their loved one who's struggling with the eating disorder, like just eat or just stop eating or just don't exercise. And if it were that simple, right, I believe then the problem could be addressed in a simple way, but it's not. And I also think that if people could will away their eating disorder, they would. No one wants to live this way necessarily. And so it's really important to understand that an eating disorder is a psychological disorder. It's also an emotional disorder. And it's a coping disorder. I kind of added that in. I don't know if people say it that way, but an eating disorder is a form of coping, right? And just like anything else, when you fall into a pattern, right, and it works, I know that might sound weird to some people, but you wouldn't engage in an eating disorder if it didn't serve you in some way, if it didn't work for you in some way. And even if this is just one example, even if it sort of numbs the pain or it distracts you from something else, that's serving a purpose, right? Think of using food is a symptom of a problem. And the other point here that I want to make is that it's not necessarily urgent or important or imperative or the priority to figure out the cause of the eating disorder. I hear a lot of people say like, oh, I got to figure out like, what's the reason for this? And then I can address it because then I'll know what it is. And then I can find a solution if I know specifically what the cause is. And I think sometimes you may figure out what the factors that contribute to the eating disorder along the way in treatment. And a lot of the time, it's not just necessarily one specific thing that caused the eating disorder. There might be one strong factor contributing. It even could be like a comment that somebody made to you in school. But usually there's a confluence of things that contribute to the emergence of an eating disorder. Kind of like a perfect storm, if you will, right? Everything just kind of lines up perfectly. And then, unfortunately, an eating disorder emerges from that. The most important thing, rather than figuring out the cause of the eating disorder, is to nourish your body in an adequate way and to help heal your body in an adequate way and to rest your body if you're engaging in overexercise, right? Addressing those things first, right? Like those physical things first. And then at that sort of cognitive level, you might be able to uncover what are some things that have contributed to your eating disorder? And then also another question, and what sustains it? And those factors may be different too, which I think sometimes surprises people. The other thing, I said it's not about food. It's not always about control too. So I think it could be in response to, right, a means of coping with, say, trauma or with diet culture, right? Trying to control something else through our body, something that feels something that's not tangible. Our bodies are tangible. And so you take things out on our bodies because it's something that we can see, we can measure, we can weigh, but maybe we might not be able to articulate how we're feeling, or we might not be processing trauma. We might not even be aware that we have trauma and that we're holding that in our bodies. But an eating disorder is a way of maybe expressing it without knowing. I add these in that an eating disorder isn't about food. It's not always about control, because I think a lot of people want a simple solution to a very complex problem. And I think that's really doing a disservice to the person that is suffering, because it's so complex and layered. And so that's why it deserves time and treatment and proper care to address it. I also think when we try to simplify complex problems, we then don't look at everything. We miss things. So here's a little side story. I remember this was a really long time ago, maybe even like 15 years ago. I don't really read the Hartford Courant, but it came to our house every day. And it was literally one of like the headlines on the front page, which was talking about an alcoholic gene, literally a gene causing alcoholism. And I laughed at it. I think I was in school at the time, but I was like, how could that possibly be? I am not saying that genetics don't play a role, that we can like pinpoint alcoholism, which is a very complex issue, on one specific gene. But I think our mind wants to go there. We want to simplify these very big, scary, messy things so that we can make sense of it. And we might not be able to, and we might not be able to right away. And that's why I think engaging in treatment or in therapy for a period of time might be helpful to uncover some of these things. So on to my fourth thing that I learned of the many is creating a robust care team. So I know I've referenced this before, but I wanted to stress it again, that it's really important that you like the people that you work with, your providers, people that are on your care team. So your therapist, if you have a nutritionist, if you have a psychiatrist, if you have a doctor that you feel doesn't know about eating disorders or doesn't know how to talk to you about eating disorders or invalidates you because of your body or maybe gives simple recommendations to, again, this very complex issue, right? Things like you need to lose weight or you need to eat more or you need to exercise less, right? That's too simple of a solution. But hopefully having a doctor that can really ask the right questions, that you feel really cares about you rather than invalidates your experience is really important. And there are very few doctors that specialize in eating disorders, and that's okay. You don't have to have a doctor that specializes in eating disorders. It's great if you do, but at least having a doctor that is compassionate, that gives you time, that you feel really cares about you, wants to get to know you, wants to learn about what's happening in your life, what you're struggling with, so that they can collaborate with you on treatment or some kind of recommendation. If you aren't buying into the treatment, it's not going to work. But if you trust your doctor, you have good rapport, you believe that they're knowledgeable and that they care, you're more likely to oh, yeah, maybe I should look into that, right? Consider what they're recommending. You get to choose who's on your care team, right? So it's completely voluntary, actually, having a doctor, seeing a doctor. I recommend it, having an eating disorder or not. It's good to have a physician that knows your medical history, following your medical journey, if you will, and can, make recommendations like, hey, we haven't done a DEXA scan in a while, or we did an EKG a year ago, 6 months ago. I think it's time to do another one, right? That's really important to have a doctor that knows your history, that knows when you've done certain medical tests and when to follow up. Sometimes you might have a nutrition therapist, and nutrition therapists, bless you all, the eating disorder probably gets mad at you a lot because you're poking the bear, right? Let's try this challenge, or let's change your meal plan a little bit. And eating disorders don't necessarily like that. And so I feel that nutrition therapists, you have a really hard job in addressing the eating disorder head on. And I think it's important to recognize when you need a nutrition therapist and maybe when you're in a good place and maybe you see them less frequently, right? That's the same with therapy as well. So if you feel like you're in a good place, emotionally, psychologically, maybe it's time to take a break from therapy. Or if you're really struggling, time to come back. Maybe it's helpful to go weekly or twice a week. Just really depends. But you get to choose your care team. You get to choose who is on that team. And hopefully they're all talking with one another. And I know I've stressed that in a previous episode, but it's really important that everyone is on the same page so that you don't get confused and that you don't get mixed messages like, oh, my nutrition therapist said to exercise this much. My doctor said this much. I don't know. So I'm doing one, but I don't know if I'm following one recommendation, but I don't know if that's necessarily right. So it's important that everybody sort of get on the same page, that we agree on recommendations, that everyone is informed of how you're doing and how, the status of your eating disorder and behaviors. Yeah, it's really important that things like meal plan guidelines and exercise guidelines, especially if they change, that you're aware of them and that your whole care team is aware of them so that everyone can help support you in those changes and when they change and why they change too. It's good to always know the rationale behind a decision or a recommendation. So the last thing that I want to share today in terms of the things that I've learned and that I really want my clients to know and people who are listening, that you're not alone and that there is help out there. And it's usually just a matter of finding it. And I know it's hard to find, and it's hard to find providers that you like, that you connect with, that you trust. But the first step is to recognize that there's a problem. And sometimes that can be hard if the people in your circle are engaged in diet talk and body shaming and disordered eating, or they have an eating disorder of their own. But if you stay quiet, the eating disorder remains unexposed and unaddressed. And so it's really important to ask for help if you are feeling something isn't right. Start talking about it with people in your close circle, people that you trust. And that goes back to the first of the WAAY's 5 points, which is develop your circle of trust, develop that supportive network of people. And it may even just be one person or two people that you really trust, and to just keep talking about it. And maybe along the way, you can find the help that you need. That is my ultimate hope, that if you do need help with your eating disorder, with body image issues, or with exercise, that you can get help and that you deserve help. It's out there. And there are people that are willing to help you find it. So I'll leave it there for now. And I really appreciate you all listening. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen in this week. I'm so glad you're here with me as we learn more from our wise bodies and about eating disorder recovery. For more, follow me on social media, and please share the Wise Body podcast with your friends. Lastly, if you're interested in a free client consultation, please reach out on drhughes.com. And remember, always take care of yourself and your temple. See you next time on the Wise Body podcast.